Hi guys, I've got a fun and easy project for you today. It is this DIY scrapbook paper wall decor that I made with scrapbook paper and Mod Podge and these easy little wood pieces that you can buy online. Let me show you how I made this. Start by picking out a bunch of scrapbook paper patterns that you like and that look good together and will match the room that you want to hang this wall decor in. I think I used about 20 different sheets of paper so that I had a nice random pattern that wasn't repeated too much. The book of scrapbook paper that I am using is called Theodosia Square. I'll put a link to similar books and hopefully this book in the description below, but you can also buy scrapbook paper individual sheets or books like this at Hobby Lobby. After I picked out 20 different sheets that I thought looked good together, I separated them into color groups to make sure that I had a nice balance of different colors so that I wouldn't have too much blue or too much green, too much yellow, whatever with the wall decor that I'm making. I found the wood squares that I'm using for this project on Amazon. It's lightweight, thin, little craft wood, perfectly cut into squares, easy for you to use for projects like this. I'll put a link to those wood squares in the description below too. The next step in this project is to cut out the scrapbook paper so that you have enough to cover a few of the squares. So I held the block up to the scrapbook paper, figured out where I needed to cut it, and then cut a strip of that scrapbook paper so that I can cover about 3 blocks with each strip of paper, and then I'll save the rest for another project later. I used Mod Podge to glue those wood squares to the back of the scrapbook paper. Now, I used a paintbrush to apply this, and I only applied it to the back of the square, but I think if I was going to do this again, I would apply the Mod Podge to the wood block and to the scrapbook paper to make sure I'm getting full contact across the square completely and I don't have any peeling up edges. I think that's the best practice to avoid peeling edges. Also, make sure you're using enough of the Mod Podge. You don't want it to be too thin or to dry out too quickly. You want a nice thick layer that is going to be evenly spread across that piece of paper. I used a few lightweight objects to kind of hold that wood square onto the scrapbook paper as the Mod Podge dried. So I wanted it to dry evenly. So that's what I'm doing here. And later on, I'm going to start stacking books onto it. About 5 minutes after gluing the wood squares to the scrapbook paper, I started flipping those rows over so that the wood squares had a better chance to dry. That glue isn't going to dry as quickly as if you have the paper facing down as it is if you have the if you have the wood facing down. So that Mod Podge needs to have access to air to help it dry out. After a few hours of letting that Mod Podge dry, I was ready to move on to the next step. So I separated all of those squares into individual separate squares by just cutting in between the pieces of the wood squares. You could have done the glue individually too so that they were already separated before you even did the glue. It would have probably made the glue up a little less complicated. Okay, now on to the messy part. I used 100 grit sandpaper to sand the excess paper off of the edges of the wood squares. It also revealed a little bit of the wood squares around the edges. Not much, just a little bit. That gave it a vintagey vibe that goes along with this paper. But it also just makes it look a little imperfect, which I think looks a lot better with wall decor projects that use scrapbook paper. And of course, my sweet cat had to come and check out why I was making such a strange noise in the dining room. She is really good at keeping a close eye on me, guys. If you have a cat, I have some DIY videos related to projects for cat owners. I'll put a link above for you to check it out. Once I had sanded the extra scrapbook paper from the edges of all of those wood squares, I cleaned up all of the dust and moved on to sealing the front of those wood squares. I started with 1 coat of the Mod Podge I was using. So the Mod Podge I had on hand at that time was a gloss finish, and I'm really not a fan of the way that looks. It can be a little bit much for some of the projects that I work on. But since that's what I had on hand, I decided to hurry up and do it, put 1 layer of that gloss finish Mod Podge on, and then see how it would look. Another reason why I usually don't like that gloss finish is because you can see brush strokes on the gloss finish way better than you can on a flat finish. And that happened here, even though I was using a really nice paintbrush. So you can see with the one on the right, you can see my brush strokes with that gloss finish, but with the flat finish, you don't see those brush strokes, and you can see the paper, the design way better with that flat finish. So to get rid of that shiny look with that gloss finish, I went over the gloss finish with one coat of a flat finish. So I'm using General Finishes Flat Out Flat. It's a top coat that I use on furniture a lot and for projects like this. Of course, I had to let that Mod Podge layer dry for a few hours before I applied this top coat. But applying that flat finish top coat got rid of that glossy finish and gave it that beautiful flat look that I showed you in the example a few seconds ago. You can completely skip this second layer of top coat if you like the gloss finish, or if you can just originally, or on your first layer of protective finish, use the matte Mod Podge. That would give you that nice flat look that I wanted anyway. Okay, now on to the fun part. I let all of those top coats dry completely. And then I started laying out the design that I wanted for these squares. So I wanted to make sure I didn't have too many pinks together, too many dark colors together, too many yellows, etc. I laid out the design the way I liked it. You can see it off to the far right in this screen. And then got the board that I wanted to glue it onto. I am using a thin sheet of plywood. So it's about a 1/4 of an inch. I'm not sure what the millimeters really are, but it's about a 1/4 of an inch plywood that is nice and stiff. And it's not going to move or wave a lot. You can buy 2x4 sheets of this stuff at Home Depot or Lowe's for generally under $10 for each 2x4 sheet. I just cut it to the size that I wanted for this project and for the frame that I was using. They do make an even slightly thinner plywood, like an underlayment that is a little bit wavy. It has a little bit of flex to it that I'm afraid that if you glue all these little blocks to, it will make some of them snap off if it accidentally flexes after your project is all glued together. So I think the thicker, more like a 1/4 inch thick plywood that doesn't have any flex is what you want to use. To keep my wood squares nice and straight, I clamped a straight edge board to the end of that piece of plywood. So you can see here, I'm using that as a guide to make sure that my squares stay nice and straight and even and lined up nicely on that board. And I am using wood glue to glue these wood squares to that plywood. So wood glue is a nice strong glue. I apply an even layer across the back of those wood squares and press it into place so that it's firmly set and I don't have to worry about these popping off later. I let that wood glue dry overnight, and here it is, guys. This is the finished artwork before I framed it. So I am loving it already. I was really excited to make a frame for it. So I made my frame, but you could do this project with a store-bought frame too. Whatever works for you. But if you want to check out how I made this frame, I'm going to have a video for that coming up too. So once I do, I'll put a link to that in the description above and then in the description below too. How beautiful is that paper? I love this paper. I always want an excuse to use it for a wall decor project. Scrapbook paper is just, I don't know, it's one of those things you always want to buy whenever you see it, but you never have any way to use it. So I came up with this DIY project using scrapbook paper for wall decor that I love and I think looks great in my bathroom. Okay guys, that is it for this project. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you're going to do this project, what kind of scrapbook paper you would use, or if you have any questions. I'm always happy to try and answer them. Goodbye for now, and goodbye from my kitty too. Bye guys.